The small town of Blackwood was known for its peaceful atmosphere, a place where everyone knew everyone. The streets were lined with cozy cottages, and the townsfolk lived simple but happy lives. However, all of that changed one fateful evening when a stranger arrived. He was tall, with piercing gray eyes and a presence that demanded attention. Dressed in a long black coat, he walked through the town square, his boots clicking against the cobbled pavement. No one knew who he was or why he was there, but whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is he?" Mrs. Thompson, the town baker, whispered to her husband. "No idea," Mr. Thompson replied, "but there's something about him, something unsettling." That night, as the town slept, a chilling scream echoed through the streets. By the time people rushed out of their homes, the stranger was gone, and so was young Emily Carter. Emily was only 12, the daughter of Sheriff Carter. She had been playing in the front yard just before sunset. Now she had vanished without a trace. The entire town was in chaos. Sheriff Carter, a man of unwavering courage, stood in the middle of the square, his hands clenched into fists. "We will find her," he declared, his voice laced with determination. "Search everywhere." Teams were formed, torches were lit, and the search began. But there were no clues, no footprints, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Then, an old man named Mr. Lawson, who had lived in Blackwood for over 70 years, muttered something that sent chills down everyone's spine. "It's happening again." Everyone turned to him, eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean, Mr. Lawson?" Sheriff Carter asked. The old man's hands trembled as he whispered, 50 years ago, the same thing happened. A stranger arrived, a child disappeared, and we never saw them again." The town was on edge. Every house was locked, every child kept inside. But one person refused to sit idly: James Holloway, a young journalist who had recently moved to Blackwood. Determined to uncover the truth, James began investigating. He visited Mr. Lawson, hoping to learn more. "Tell me everything," James insisted. Mr. Lawson hesitated, then sighed. 50 years ago, a man just like the one we saw today came to Blackwood. The night he arrived, a little boy, Tommy Grayson, disappeared. The town searched for weeks but found nothing. And then, the stranger vanished too. James frowned. "And no one ever figured out what happened?" Mr. Lawson shook his head. "Some say he took the boy. Others believe something much darker was at play." As James left Mr. Lawson's house, he felt uneasy. It was then he noticed something strange, a shadow in the alleyway, watching him. But when he turned to confront it, the shadow was gone. The hidden clue. Days passed and hope was fading. But then a breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. Mrs. Thompson, while baking bread, found a piece of parchment hidden inside a flour sack. It was old, the edges burnt, and on it were the words, "The sins of the past shall awaken the darkness of the present." She rushed to Sheriff Carter, who examined the parchment with narrowed eyes. "Where did you find this?" "In the flour sack," she said, breathless. "I don't know how it got there." James, who was present, immediately made the connection. 50 years ago, did anyone else disappear? Mr. Lawson, who had been called in for questioning, nodded. "Yes, Tommy's father, Henry Grayson. He was the town's miller. He disappeared the night after his son did." James exchanged a glance with the sheriff. "I think this is all connected, but how?" Days passed, and hope was fading. But then, a breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. Mrs. Thompson, while baking bread, found a piece of parchment hidden inside a flour sack. It was old, the edges burnt, and on it were the words, "The sins of the past shall awaken the darkness of the present." She rushed to Sheriff Carter, who examined the parchment with narrowed eyes. "Where did you find this?" "In the flour sack," she said, breathless. "I don't know how it got there." James, who was present, immediately made the connection. 50 years ago, did anyone else disappear? Mr. Lawson, who had been called in for questioning, nodded. "Yes, Tommy's father, Henry Grayson. He was the town's miller. He disappeared the night after his son did. James exchanged a glance with the sheriff. I think this is all connected. But how? James spent the next night going through the town's archives. Buried under piles of dusty newspapers, he found an old yellowed page with a shocking headline: Miller Henry Grayson accused of witchcraft, executed by the people of Blackwood. James's breath caught. He kept reading. In the year 1872, Henry Grayson was accused of practicing dark magic. The townsfolk, led by then Sheriff Walter Carter, dragged him to the old oak tree and hanged him. His body was buried in an unmarked grave. James's heart pounded. The town had buried a dark secret. Could it be that Henry Grayson's spirit had returned for revenge? Before he could process the thought, a loud noise came from outside. A scream. James and Sheriff Carter rushed toward the sound. Near the town's old windmill, they saw him, the stranger in black. He stood under the pale moonlight, holding Emily in his arms. Let her go, Sheriff Carter commanded, gun raised. The man smirked. Your ancestors buried the truth, Sheriff, but the dead never stay buried. His voice sent shivers down James's spine. Who are you? James demanded. The man tilted his head. You already know. And then, before their very eyes, his form shimmered. His face aged and decayed, transforming into the spectral image of Henry Grayson. His voice, now an eerie whisper, echoed in the night. You took my son, so I take yours. Emily screamed as the ghostly figure began to fade, pulling her into the shadows. Sheriff Carter fired his gun, but the bullet passed through the spirit. James acted fast. The grave. We need to find his grave. With torches in hand, they ran to the old oak tree. Digging frantically, their hands bled as they unearthed the forgotten grave of Henry Grayson. James pulled out the parchment they had found earlier and read the words aloud. The sins of the past shall awaken the darkness of the present. The ground trembled. A chilling wail filled the air. And then, silence. The wind died down, the torches stopped flickering, and Henry Grayson's figure dissipated into a mist. Emily collapsed into her father's arms, unharmed. The nightmare was over. The town of Blackwood had hidden its past, but the truth had found a way to resurface. The people learned a valuable lesson that night. The sins of the past must never be buried, for they will always find a way to return. From that day forward, Blackwood honored its history, both good and bad. They placed a proper gravestone for Henry Grayson, ensuring he would finally rest in peace. And as for the stranger in black, he never returned. But the people of Blackwood would never forget the night the past came knocking.